9 minutes. That was the precise duration of the footage that drew immediate and widespread global attention from audiences around the world. Those 9 minutes featured one individual standing calmly in front of a simple blue background in Ottawa, delivering measured and thoughtful remarks, delivered with steady composure and a clear sense of purpose. And when those 9 minutes finally came to a close, 3 of the planet's biggest commodity markets had abruptly stopped trading activity. The White House Situation Room had been brought online for the first time since the previous major international emergency, and the term Arctic clause was trending rapidly around the world on digital platforms and social media feeds. I have reported on economic disputes in the past, often following complex developments closely as they unfolded across international borders and involved multiple parties. I have covered sanctions, trade barriers, and counter tariffs among competing countries in various regions of the world. Yet I have never seen a current national leader accomplish what Mark Carney achieved at 9:41 a.m. Eastern this morning with such quiet precision and remarkable effectiveness. He issued no threats of any kind during his address. He struck no dramatic poses for effect or to heighten the moment. He merely described, in the exact professional terminology of a person who has operated for decades within the worldwide financial structure, precisely what Canada had implemented and why the United States lacked any practical means to undo it. What renders this episode remarkable is not merely the measure itself, significant though it clearly was in its scope and implications. It is how thoroughly understated the entire approach remained from beginning to end, without any unnecessary escalation or show of force. Canada initiated one of the most impactful economic responses in the long record of its ties with the United States. And it carried this out without a single aggressive move, without offloading any securities on the open market, and without any action that a regulator or judge could reasonably deem hostile or provocative in nature. What Canada put in place was entirely lawful under existing frameworks, thoughtfully designed with careful attention to detail at every stage, and profoundly significant in its potential reach and long-term effects. And virtually nobody in Washington truly understood the full development until it had already passed the point of no return, leaving limited options for immediate reversal or quick countermeasures. Let us review how events unfolded here in careful sequence, since the order of steps is crucial to understanding the situation, and the choices taken during the last 72 hours have set off a series of outcomes that cannot be easily reversed or walked back without considerable effort and negotiation. 3 days earlier, the White House unveiled what it termed the North American Energy Security Framework in a formal announcement that drew initial coverage. The executive order, finalized in the Oval Office with the Secretaries of Energy, Commerce, and Treasury standing alongside the President, established a fresh regulatory framework mandating that all energy imports from Canada and Mexico be valued, billed, and cleared exclusively via a new clearing body overseen directly by the US Treasury. In public statements and briefings that followed, this was presented as a straightforward update, an effort to simplify commerce and refresh outdated systems for greater efficiency in daily operations. The president portrayed it as a practical step toward reducing red tape and modernizing energy commerce in line with current needs and economic realities. Cable networks gave it brief attention in their coverage before shifting quickly to other developing stories of the day that competed for airtime. But within the Bank of Canada, the Ministry of Finance, and the Prime Minister's office, the true meaning and potential consequences became obvious right away to those familiar with the mechanics of cross-border finance and international payment systems. This clearing body was not merely an administrative update or technical improvement aimed at streamlining processes. It was a mechanism of oversight with far-reaching implications for how trade would function moving forward. By compelling every Canadian energy shipment to route through one American-managed platform for processing and settlement, Washington had gained the practical power to postpone, halt, or prevent payments for Canadian oil, gas, uranium, and hydroelectric electricity whenever it chose, and to do so free from immediate court supervision or external judicial review in most cases. Canada sends over $170 billion worth of energy to the United States each year, a volume that forms a critical pillar of bilateral economic relations and mutual dependence. That substantial income backs provincial finances in meaningful ways, supports retirement funds for many citizens across the country, funds essential public works projects that benefit communities, and sustains jobs throughout various regions across the nation from east to west. The fresh arrangement implied that one official ruling from Washington could essentially halt or significantly disrupt that steady stream of revenue with relative ease, creating potential vulnerabilities in the overall economic relationship. According to sources familiar with the internal discussions that took place, Carney examined the complete directive in detail less than 40 minutes after it appeared publicly on official channels. He then placed 3 carefully considered calls in quick succession. First to the governor of the Bank of Canada, second to the leader of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, and third to a high-ranking figure thought to be linked with the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. By that night, a counterplan had begun forming quietly and methodically behind the scenes, something the White House would fail to identify or fully appreciate until countering it had become practically impossible under the circumstances that were rapidly developing. For 2 full days afterward, no outward activity or visible escalation took place on the Canadian side that would draw immediate notice. Canada released a measured official comment voicing concern over the new framework and asking for constructive discussions between the two nations to address the matter. The wording stayed diplomatic and notably moderate in tone, avoiding any sharp language that might inflame tensions. Observers and commentators in the media viewed the reply as relatively feeble, perhaps even yielding under pressure from the larger neighbor. That initial reading, however, proved completely mistaken upon closer examination of the broader picture that was unfolding. Out of sight from public view, one of the most refined economic countermeasures ever mounted by a medium-sized country facing a superpower was advancing with remarkable exactness and coordination across relevant institutions. And it revolved around one key resource that remained mostly ignored in much of the American media coverage at the time: uranium, which plays a specialized yet vital role in energy production. Canada ranks as the world's second-largest uranium producer, with established operations that have supplied global markets reliably for years and maintained consistent output levels. Its output powers approximately 31% of the U.S. civilian nuclear reactor network, a dependency that runs deep into the American energy infrastructure and affects multiple regions. Those reactors, in turn, generate roughly 20% of America's overall electricity supply, making the connection especially vital for consistent power generation and grid stability across the country. No rapid or easily accessible alternative exists in the short term to replace this contribution without causing noticeable disruptions. Uranium logistics differ sharply from those of oil or natural gas. They cannot be swapped easily or quickly without significant adjustments to existing systems and contracts. Reactors are finely tuned to particular fuel specifications under extended long-term agreements, and changing providers may require as long as 2 years of preparation, plus multiple layers of official clearances and safety validations before operations can resume smoothly. At 6 a.m. Eastern Time today, 3 distinct yet coordinated measures unfolded simultaneously across Canadian institutions in a carefully synchronized manner. First, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission released a directive halting all uranium export permits while conducting a full safety and sovereignty assessment of the current processes to ensure compliance and security. The wording of the directive stayed technical, strictly rule-based, and firmly grounded in established Canadian law without deviation. It carefully avoided mentioning the United States or citing the recent executive order in any direct way that could be seen as confrontational. It merely delayed shipments during an evaluation period that can lawfully last as long as 180 days under existing regulatory provisions designed for such reviews. Second, KCO Corporation, recognized as the top-listed uranium mining company in the Western world, formally invoked force majeure on its American supply agreements, pointing to the regulatory pause as an uncontrollable external factor beyond the company's influence or control. Third, Canada's Ministry of Natural Resources introduced stricter checking standards and enhanced verification requirements for rare earth shipments, which effectively delayed deliveries for a minimum of 90 days while the new protocols were implemented across the supply chain. These substances play vital roles in U.S. military equipment, advanced chip manufacturing, and the production of battery-powered cars, forming essential components in multiple strategic sectors that support technology and defense needs. None of these moves qualified as sanctions in any formal sense or crossed established lines. None breached existing trade pacts or international obligations that Canada had entered into over the years. None singled out the United States by name or framed the actions as retaliatory in any explicit manner. They amounted instead to internal policy adjustments and regulatory refinements that remained completely inside Canada's national rights and sovereign authority to implement. Still, when combined and viewed together as a package, they created one of the most accurately aimed economic interruptions ever directed at American essential systems by a close partner and ally. At 9:41 a.m., Eastern Time, Carney stepped in front of the camera in the video that has now been seen widely across international outlets and shared extensively online. Standing alone behind a simple lectern with minimal staging or visual elements to distract from the message, wearing ordinary business attire and speaking without any visible script or notes in hand, his manner stayed steady and composed throughout, nearly analytical in delivery, closely resembling an expert describing an intricate technical process to an informed audience that understands the complexities involved. There was no display of fury or emotion in his voice or expression, no showmanship or rhetorical flourishes to heighten the drama, only clear and deliberate description of the facts at hand in a straightforward way. He detailed the clearing authority thoroughly and methodically, cited its specific clauses from the order with precision, and clarified exactly what it meant for Canadian independence and decision-making autonomy in practical terms. Then he stopped briefly for emphasis and said directly, "No sovereign nation can accept such conditions, and Canada does not." He characterized the policy measures Canada had taken as routine evaluations and standard reviews, stressing the importance of protection, safety, and regulatory adherence in all such matters. Then arrived the statement that quietly but decisively changed the landscape for all parties involved in the situation. Canada stands ready to serve as a dependable ally to countries that regard it as an equal and will speed up collaboration on that basis, moving forward with those partners. The meaning came through clearly and without ambiguity for listeners. Shipments were not stopping permanently or being canceled outright in a final sense. They were being reassigned and redirected toward new arrangements with willing participants. Nations such as France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and India all run substantial nuclear programs and could gain from dependable Canadian resources, particularly through agreements settled outside the US dollar system where appropriate. This went beyond a simple halt in trade flows between the two neighbors. It represented a thoughtful redirection plan that left the U.S. positioned on the outside of the revised supply networks that were beginning to take shape. The market response came swiftly and broke historical records in several categories as trading reacted in real time. Uranium prices climbed more than 40% in a matter of hours as trading reacted to the news and uncertainty spread. Cameco shares jumped sharply in value before exchanges suspended activity to manage the resulting volatility and prevent further disorder. American utility companies saw their stocks fall steeply and without immediate recovery in many cases, shedding tens of billions in overall market worth within a short window of trading. Rare earth values increased markedly in every major segment as concerns about availability spread quickly among participants. Yet the most important and far-reaching change took place in the debt markets, where subtle but powerful shifts began to appear in yield curves and investor sentiment. US Treasury yields climbed steeply, not primarily from outright large-scale selling, but from a growing sense of apprehension among investors who were reassessing risks. If the U.S. could impose payment oversight and control mechanisms on long-standing partners and allies in this manner, then holdings in dollars now carried fresh uncertainties that had not been factored in before to the same degree. Central banks around the world reacted discreetly yet firmly to the unfolding situation as it developed. Accounts from informed sources showed several reserve handlers starting to trim their treasury positions in a measured fashion, while simultaneously boosting stakes in euros and gold as alternative stores of value for diversification. On their own, these were modest adjustments taken individually by each institution, but taken together across multiple institutions, they carried noticeable cumulative weight in the broader markets. Gold reached new record peaks amid the uncertainty that prevailed. The Swiss franc grew stronger against major currencies in forex trading. The euro advanced steadily in trading sessions. Even cryptocurrencies experienced greater inflows as some participants sought assets perceived as operating outside traditional systems and government controls. The White House pushed back promptly by labeling Canada's moves as hidden payback for the energy framework and cautioning about the possibility of broader retaliatory steps in response if the situation continued. Representatives asserted confidently that backup supply networks could substitute for Canadian contributions without significant delay or disruption to overall operations. Experts and analysts in the field pushed back on that assessment, pointing to the structural realities involved in energy supply chains. Securing new uranium sources on the scale required would demand years of development and investment before they could become operational. Local domestic output in the United States stays limited and insufficient to fill the gap quickly in any meaningful way. Worldwide options remain relatively scarce, and many are already locked into other long-term deals with different buyers around the globe. No fast or immediate fix is readily available under current conditions or existing infrastructure. By mid-afternoon, the Pentagon put out an official release underscoring defense-related worries linked directly to the supply interruptions, signaling clear divisions inside the administration's overall stance on the matter and highlighting internal debates. Legislators from impacted regions and states voiced their own concerns in public statements, highlighting the critical strategic value of Canadian supplies to both energy security and industrial needs in their areas. Later that evening, matters intensified further on the world stage as reactions continued to build from various capitals. The European Commission declared faster progress on the development of a backup payment system designed to reduce reliance on existing structures and invited Canada to participate as a partner in the initiative going forward. Shortly afterward, Japan, the UK, South Korea, and Australia each released comparable announcements expressing interest in diversified approaches to enhance their own resilience. The signal stood out plainly and consistently across these statements. Movement towards systems operating with greater independence from U.S.-controlled mechanisms had clearly started gaining momentum among key players in the international community. Carney required no flashy public displays or confrontational rhetoric to make his point effectively. He showed, via exact and entirely legitimate regulatory steps taken within Canada's authority, that heavy reliance on a single centralized platform for payments and settlements brings inherent vulnerabilities that can be exposed under certain conditions. The worldwide reaction emerged naturally and organically in the hours that followed the address. Tonight, the final result of this sequence still stays unclear and subject to further developments as discussions continue. One possible route points toward calming tensions through dialogue and eventual rolling back of certain changes on both sides, although lasting confidence and trust between the parties would likely stay impaired for some time, even in that case. Another route points toward heightened conflict and more fundamental changes in patterns of commerce and monetary affairs over the longer term if positions harden. A third option, more worrisome in its potential scope, would create a lasting precedent for additional resource-rich countries to follow comparable strategies when facing similar pressures, ultimately altering worldwide economic patterns and relationships in meaningful ways over time.